I am so thankful. This is recorded right around Thanksgiving. I'm so thankful to have Dr. Oscar Corrigan on the podcast. Anytime that Dr. Douglas Fisher and Dr. Nancy Frey partner with somebody, I know that person that they partner with is an expert among experts. So when I learned about Dr. Corrigan, I was like, I need to have you on the podcast. So welcome to the podcast, Dr. Corrigan.
Thank you so much, man. It's a pleasure to be in here. I think that we are aligned and with every single point when we think about multilingual learners. And I couldn't be more excited to just share some time with you and then talk about our experiences and talk about how we can help our multilingual learners be successful.
Well, let's start talking about that first. Can you share a story about teaching that has influenced your practice to this day?
Yes, I started in middle school, so sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. I know that you've taught in middle school too. So I know that I felt very green. I felt like, man, I don't know that I'm ready for this. The kids had so much energy, and my initial focus was on designing great lessons and being intentional and knowing exactly, we're going to talk about teacher clarity today. All those things came up. And then I realized once you get the kids in the classroom, it's about building the relationships. It's about getting to know your students and really understanding what it is that they need, right? If you're really going to help them be successful, you got to understand where they're at and where their passions are. And so I quickly realized that in order to make an impact, I needed to create those connections with the students, and I needed to know, how I was able to engage them and get them connected to the content, right? It wasn't just, hey, here's the learning intentions, let's learn some history. They were going to tune me off. And so it was, okay, so here's what you're really excited about. Let's talk about that. Let's build on that, and then let's get to the content. And so I think that quickly, one of my favorite activities that come to mind is we had a all about me foldable, and it required little background knowledge when it came to content, right? It was all about background knowledge of themselves. And what we really wanted to do is for them to understand that they brought experience with them that were valued in our classroom. And so we asked them to talk about themselves. And so one of the tabs was just quickly demographics, hobbies, interests, things that you like. And then the second one was aspirations. What do you want to reach? Where is it that you want to go? What are the things that you're excited about? And obviously for me in the background, I was gathering all this information so I can use it later. But the third tab was my favorite one was they were required to interview somebody in their family. It could be any family member, and they had to share one family story. And, we always told students, get on the phone, ask somebody that's at home, whoever's available, share one story, one thing that you can bring in. And it really, what it did, it created a sense of community in their classroom. And we were able to learn a lot about each other starting from the first week, and everybody felt successful, which, thinking back, so many of my experiences in the classroom, from the first day, I did not feel successful, right? And so being able to change that for our students as a teacher was very impactful for me.
Well, why don't we talk about that a little bit more? Before we started recording, you talked about your experiences. Can you tell us about your experience as being a multilingual learner?
Yes, of course. So I was born in Bogota, Colombia in the 1985. I lived there for a few years, and my family was seeking something different. At the time the country was in a lot of turmoil, and so we moved to Panama. And so I actually spent the majority of my elementary schooling in Panama. And so I moved to the United States at the age of 11. So that would put me in sixth grade. And it was interesting, your world kind of ends as a child. You get on a plane, everything is gone. Your friends are gone. You're thinking this is the end. But I remember my grandmother wanting me to not miss a beat. You have to go to school. And so the day after I landed on a plane, we went to register a school. And to this day, I remember the conversation was very quick. What's his name? Is he new to the country? The answer was yes. The next question was, where does it come from? And the moment my grandmother said Panama, You could have seen it. It was over. They said English learner, which at the time I did not know what that was, but English learner, here's going to be his classes. I heard the term EL1, 2, because that's where he's going to go. We'll have his schedule. He's ready to start tomorrow. And so, uh, to be frank, when I started school, it was too easy. You know, I had what they didn't know is I had learned English throughout my elementary school years. And so I was given assignments such as, you know, here are your numbers 1 through 10, you know, very simple, low level colors, you know, names of fruits. And so I just felt like, hey, like, I don't really need to pay attention. I already know all these things. And then sadly, I don't know the situation is the same in other schools, but for us, English learners were in a different wing of the school. And so I started quickly realizing that, you know, I was looked at way different than the other students, you know, and there was this label that was, you know, walking with me anywhere that I was, you know, introduced to a teacher was, here's Oscar, he's an English learner, right? And then to me was like, I remember just feeling inside, like wanting to scream, like, I can learn this. I can do this. I know the content. Like you don't have to do things differently for me. But I knew right away that the expectations were set at that point. You know, he can't do it. He's not as, you know, as experienced. He doesn't know the content. And so it was really, really hard. And I could tell you that as I think back now that I have been through the educational system myself, like maybe that's why I made some bad choices. You know, I became a student who had behavior issues. And I think if I always laughed, my grandmother would ask me, I had like straight A's and straight U's. I was that student, right? Like how is that happening? But it was because I felt, you know, unwanted. I felt like I didn't belong in a classroom. And so I made all those choices. But the
What are
work
straight
was so,
U's?
say that again. Oh,
What?
straight unsatisfactory. So
Oh,
behaviorally. So see, we get a citizenship gift. So you have your academic grade, right? So academically, because it wasn't so rigorous, I could get an A. It was easy. But behaviorally, I was doing everything in the book that said I wasn't a good student, right? Like I was talking excessively, I was late, I was leaving class, I was doing all those things. And as I think back, you know, had I been challenged, I think I would have stayed in the classroom. It would have been a little bit different.
how long were you in the English learner program?
Okay, so I'm gonna tell you this is funny that so I was in the program for I want to say about a month and a half. Um and but let me explain it a little bit better. About a month and a half into it, my grandfather was like, "What is going on? You do no homework at home. I'm getting these calls about these behaviors, but somehow you're passing your classes. So let me find out. Let me see your backpack. Let me see what you're doing." And the moment he took out the work from my backpack and he saw my assignments and he saw what I had to do, because obviously he knows my experience before I moved here, he was like, "This is unacceptable. What are you doing? You need to, like, you know, English. Like, you should not be in this program." And so he went back to the school and I remember him having this argument and saying they told him I needed to be reassessed. Because what I forgot, what I left out is I was assessed the day that I enrolled in school, but because I was so tired, I remember the lady saying, like, "It's okay, you don't have to finish it. We know, like, basically, we know where you're going to end up." And so they reassessed me. And after I was done with that assessment, I went from EL1-2 to what they call bridging, which is like the last step before you can get out of the program. But I had to do that to be able to get out this program that I should have never been in the first place. Um, but it's an interesting story. I just, you know, it changed the way I looked at everything. And I went from doing apple, banana, and, you know, numbers to here's a 5-page essay that you have to write. And so it's just interesting. And, you know, as I look now, I don't ever want that experience for our students. And so when I think of our students at our schools, like I want them to feel like they're valued and like we honored them. And I don't ever want them to go through the same feelings.
Right. And they feel that when the system says, okay, we're going to put you in a different wing, or, oh, we're going to put you in a trailer in the back of a school. and you have
Exactly.
to walk through the rain and all the weather to get there. There's like no cover. I still remember like, and sometimes that trailer doesn't have electricity. It's like what are we communicating to our students? Or like I've seen it in other classes where like, oh, we have an extra custodian closet and there's only like a few of you. So why don't you we'll take everything out and you could use like the room under Harry Potter's like stairs. Like that's where you
Horrible.
learn. No
Yes,
projector, ain't no
horrible.
right, horrible. Like what are we communicating to students? And this is why there's now increasingly more pushback
Right.
against pull-out programs or like
Hmm.
it's still segregated learning. Yes, pull-out program sometimes has a role in particular newcomers and beginners, but kids who have social language, why are they still being pulled out? Like
Right.
why like you could have you the teachers could have been in your classes
Hmm.
co-teaching co-planning and saying like okay, Oscar needs to learn about ecosystems and we're going to work together to figure out the language behind that and then the science behind that and work on that together. Yeah, every book has a seed. What was the book for this seed, Oscar?
So for me, like we've been talking about, I think it started with my experiences as a multilingual learner myself, as a student, and wanting to change that for students moving forward. But I think as I became an adult and I entered the educational field and I became an educator, um, I saw that there was little change, right? There little change had happened since the time that I was in the classroom to the time that I was a teacher. And you would expect that, as times move forward, that practices would change, and that the experiences of multilingual learners would change. But it wasn't happening. And so I needed to make sure that we all understood that multilingual learners are capable learners. I needed everyone to see and read that multilingual learners have a vast experience that they can bring into the classroom. And I wanted to make sure that we got rid of that what I call the negative label, right? English language learner to me became a negative label that I always had to overcome. And I think that every time I heard it, I felt a lack of confidence, or I felt like, I now think of that stereotype threat, right? Oh no, if I say this wrong, I am going to validate this stereotype. And so it always felt like this uphill climb, this uphill barrier that I had to get over. And so when I had the opportunity to do my dissertation, I wanted to make sure that we got rid of that, and I wanted to make sure that we value multilingual learners and that we made things a lot more streamlined for them so that they can be successful. Because I can tell you right now that they bring that curriculum with them in the class, when they walk in the door, right? Like they have such valuable experiences that everyone can learn from.
Well, you certainly teamed up with the right people to write this book. I mean, who gets to write with Dr. John Hattie and Dr. Douglas Fisher? And so you actually brought them together, or they brought you together, or the team was brought together using visible thinking research. So tell us about the connection between multilingual learners and visible thinking research.
Well, I can say I am thankful for a great mentorship. I think that teaming up with Hattie, Fisher, Fry, just allowed me to see how education can make a difference, right? How it could be intentional. I think that is the big key. How can we be intentional and make sure that we are meeting the needs of our students? And so when I had this opportunity, when I needed to write my dissertation, I got together with Dr. Fisher, and he said, we've been thinking about this, and we want to address some of the gaps that exist, and we like where you're going, and why don't we just do this together? We've been thinking about how we can tie visible learning into the field of multilingual learners. So this is the perfect opportunity. And so we decided to look at, the practices that made the greatest impact, that really could be aimed at multilingual learners and could ensure that they had a positive impact in their learning. And so that's what we set out to build, right? I came up with this 5C models, and really the idea for me was it needs to be comprehensive. It needs to tackle the child as a whole. If we really want the experience to be equitable, we can't just focus on one or the other. as I did my research and I read on things that were found online, most of it focused on academics and academic language, bics and caps, right? Going back to all that, right? Like, and they miss so much of a child and their experiences. And I kept going back to my own personal experiences where I felt like, some of these conditions were changed. If some of the ways that I was addressed would have been changed, I would have tapped into the content. But no matter how great the teaching was, if those things weren't in place, I wasn't going in because I didn't want to be a part of it, and I didn't feel like they wanted me to be a part of it. And so that's where it all came together. Okay, how do we create a comprehensive approach to a multilingual learner so that we can meet their needs?
Yeah, I remember seeing visible learning, like the not the franchises, but the most notable series, like
Mhm.
visible learning for literacy, visible learning for mathematics. And I was like, where's the visible learning for multilinguals? And I'm like, when it came out, I was like, oh my goodness, we have to share this book. I need to get this book in my hand. And so when it was published, I was like, finally, visible learning for multilingual learners. So you introduced the 5C, you talked about it. So let's talk about your framework for the rest of the podcast. And can you go through each part of the framework, and share examples of that?
Of course, yes. So like I said, we wanted to come up with a comprehensive approach. And so we came up with the 5C model, the first one being climate. And so when we talk about climate, we wanted to talk about the environment, the feeling of the classroom, right? And so my one area that really popped out was belonging. Do we have an environment in our classrooms in which students, especially multilingual learners, feel like they belong, like they feel valued, like they feel heard? And so we wanted to make sure that we created every little aspect of the classroom to nurture that feeling for our students. And so how better than to have our students share about themselves, right? Share about their experiences and share about their likes and their dislikes so that they could understand that every single experience that they've had makes a difference, right? And so when we really think about that sense of belonging is, can I collaborate? Like we talked about earlier, can we eliminate that feeling that you have to be pulled out and you have to be taken to a different area to learn, right? That's unacceptable. You don't belong here if I have to pull you out. You don't belong here if you're, you know what, we're going through the lesson, now you need to go. It tells the student everything but that they are part of the student. And so what we wanted to do is focus on this physical setting of the classroom and how we organize it. So if you were to go through the book, you see some examples of how we can ensure that our classroom creates collaboration opportunities, right? Where students get to interact daily and get to communicate and have that opportunity to practice academic language and social language, right? Because they're seated together and they have to be able to learn from one another. We talk about classroom agreements and how the students should be able to create the norms within the classroom. It is their room. I can tell you right now, being in the classroom, one of my favorite activities was to start the year off by allowing them to come up with the classroom rules. They, as students, know exactly what is needed. Sometimes they were a little harsher than me, right? Some of the rules that they wanted in their rooms were like a lot tougher. I'm like, okay, like, do we want to do that? Are we going to hold ourselves accountable to these things? But what was happening is they were taking ownership. This is our room, and this is what it's going to take for us to be able to learn together in this room. We also talk about grouping and how to group our students to be successful. I love to share. For me as a classroom teacher, I made sure that I change seating assignments constantly. Every 3 weeks, you had a new seating chart, and the students came to expect it. But what I really wanted was, number one, to ensure that everybody was working with one another. If we're going to call it a community, you got to make sure that everybody's engaging with one another, right? Everybody's working together. But number two, I was able to then manipulate where students sat so that I could help multilingual learners be successful, right? And in my case, I have a large population of Spanish speakers. and they know so much about what's going on, but they can't communicate it in English. And so if you give them the opportunity to have a partner, right, a peer partner in which they can say it to them in Spanish, hey, here's what's going on in history today, that partner can then voice the student's opinion, right? And they can contribute. I think that one of the main things that we wanted was to ensure that students felt like they can contribute to the classroom and that they brought knowledge and that they can contribute what they already knew, what they had learned, and what they wanted to learn to their peers. Is taking that away, that feeling that they were just there and they have nothing to contribute, right? That's really what we wanted to remove.
Yeah, they say that it's before you can bloom, match those before bloom. That's what they say. You have to make sure that students' physical but also emotional needs are met before you have access to they have the mental space to learn content. They have to know that they're safe. They have to know that they're welcome. And that's why climate is so important. Yeah, four
Well,
more. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, no, I was just gonna say, and when I work with adults, I always bring this up. Whenever we have a professional learning opportunity or any time of setting like that, when we walk in, we all have that sense of belonging, right? Or that need that we look for people that we know. We look for the table where we know we're going to be able to contribute and feel comfortable, right? We do it as adults. And so I think that, the kids are the same way. And so my biggest takeaway now is many of the feelings that our students are experiencing, we experience as adults. And so why not take that into account when we're creating these environments in our rooms?
Exactly. Adults feel it too. So imagine how a student feels. Right? Let's move to any of the other ones, other C's.
Okay, so our next one is challenge. And so when we talked about challenge, we talk about teacher expectations. And so for me, this one reminded me of those feelings as a sixth grader, right? The expectations for me were lowered the moment I was told I was an English learner. And so that expectation bar had decreased. I was giving low level, no rigor tasks because honestly, I don't think it was for a bad. I always say this. I don't think that any time in my education that a teacher wanted to do harm or cause harm, they were trying to do what they thought was best. And in their eyes, they believed I was new to the country. I did not know the language, and so I couldn't contribute. I want to change that thinking. That's the purpose, right? We want to change the thinking and tell teachers that your students bring with them a lot of knowledge. And so we have to keep our expectations high. And we want to make sure that the work that we give students is challenging, not busy work, but that is challenging. It is challenging their thinkings because we want to make sure that we as teachers are designing complex tasks. And I know that we do that for every other student. Let's not change it for our multilingual learners. Let's push them. Let's just make sure that we implement the necessary scaffolds for them to be successful so that they can access that curriculum, that they can show you the knowledge that they have. And so when I think my time in the classroom, I realized that no matter how complex or how rigorous the task was, if I had enough scaffolds and supports for my multilingual learners, they were always able to reach that expectation. It was never an issue. And yes, for some of them, it took longer. And for some of our multilingual learners, it took more supports. But because I believed they could, and I wasn't going to give up, they pushed themselves. And they attempted it, and they continued to push and push and push and push till they got it. And so I realized that it's just like anybody else. I think that if you really want it, you're going to push yourself to know it. And so for challenge of learning, if you were to look through the whole chapter, it gives you a lot of different ways in which can challenge our multilingual learners in a productive way so that they can be successful students in the classroom.
You're basically saying high challenge, high support, right? And so students can. I guess you're really challenging WIDA. WIDA is saying like students can. Everything when we work with multilingual learners, we think about first what can students do, and let's build on that. You said there are a lot of things in that chapter. What is one thing we could do to challenge students?
So we have this great quadrant in which we look at fluency, stamina, strategy thinking, and struggle. And it's where we want our students to be, right? Uh, if we think about fluency, that's something that is very low rigor, right? It's an easy task, but it's something that's going to require a lot of practice. It's something that we have to do, and we have to do constantly so that they are practicing their fluency. So low difficulty, low complexity, but they can do it, right? Then we want to push them a little bit. And so talk about stamina. So something that's a little higher in difficulty, but it's still low in complexity, but we can start pushing the students. So if you think about power writing, right? It's one of the things that I did with one of my middle schoolers. So we'd have time where you had to write, and it was time, you have 2 minutes, write as much as you know about, and I would just put a word on there. We can start pushing that stamina, right? We can go to 3 minutes. We can go to 4 minutes. We can start adding different variables to the rating so that the students can push themselves and that they can improve where they currently are.
Let's move
Yeah.
to another one, another seed, three more.
So the next one is clarity. And so if you know anything about visible learning, we need to make sure that we remove the anxieties that we all have, if we don't have clarity, right? Clarity is the antidote to anxiety. We need our multilingual learners to understand what is expected of them. If they know their expectations, then they can accomplish those expectations. And so when we talk about clarity, we're talking about them understanding what is it that they're learning today? Why am I learning it? And how will the learner myself, will know that I am achieving these? And so one of the things that we talk about in the book is this idea of success criteria and learning intentions, right? And their learning intentions are a destination where we want our students to end that day, but we have little checkpoints along the way that are called success criteria so that a student can self-assess, okay, I am understanding where I am on this learning journey and I am doing great, right? Or a student can say, hey, can I get your help? I haven't been able to check any of these success criterias. I'm stuck. Can I get support? The second side of this is when I was in the classroom, this would be my exit slip. And so I would have students turn in their success criteria, checked in the box, not checked in the box. And so as a teacher, I was able to look through the exit slip, and I knew, am I ready to move on? Or do I need to reteach the content? Because I think that unfortunately in so many experiences, we move on. Okay, I have a timeline. I have to get through all this content, and your students are stuck. And so as a teacher, it was so valuable to know where they felt they were, because they'll be honest. They'll tell you exactly where they're at in their learning journey, right? And so as a teacher, I was able to stop, time out. We're going to go back. I'm going to do a little bit better job of adding clarity about the content that we are learning so that we can be successful. And so I think that is one of the biggest takeaways that I had as a classroom teacher, was daily informal ways of assessing whether the students understood the content or not. And when it came to multilingual learners, no better way than having one-on-one conversations than to going over the exit slip, right? Once I read the exit slip, I wanted to understand, was it the content? Is it a language barrier? Or is it a combination of both? Because then I can add the necessary scaffolds to ensure that the student's understanding that content.
Um, would you tell us about the effect size of clarity on learning?
Yes, so the effect size for student learning on teacher clarity is a 0.85. And so as we know on visible learning, the desired effect size is 0.04. And so we can see that teacher clarity has a huge impact on the learning of students. And so this is one that you cannot overlook, right? As I now get to work with many other schools and I get to travel, I get to see the difference in classrooms when they have learning intentions posted on the board, right? So the students know exactly where they're expected to learn, and the classrooms that don't, and how, easy or complicated it could be for a student to verbally tell you what is it that they're doing and why is it that they're doing it. And, I've learned that with learning intentions, the kids can articulate the purpose of the learning. And often without the learning intentions, the kids will tell you the task that they're doing. And right. So it's just that superficial, like this is what we're doing. But it doesn't really get to, okay, what is the content and why are you learning that content?
Yeah, I guess when you're talking about teacher clarity, it's like double the effect size. That's huge. And I think when I work with teachers and when I think about my own instruction, the first lens in which I see my instruction is through comprehensible input. And you're channeling SciOp right there. Like, how can we make content comprehensible, our instructions comprehensible? If they're not, there is no output. And so I'm happy that you added clarity of learning as part of one of your 5 C's. 2 more C's.
Yes. So the next one is cohesion of learning. And we wanted to look at the teaching practices, at the way that we as teachers make the content accessible to multilingual learners. And so one of the best ways that we can say this is modeling, right? As a classroom teacher, I realized that the better I modeled, the easier it was for multilingual learners to be successful in the classroom. A task as simple as creating a foldable, right? If I got up in front of the room and I demonstrated exactly, here's a hamburger fold, and now we're going to do a hot dog fold, right? But I was visually showing the students how to do it. All of a sudden, you saw the smiles. Nobody was lost. Multilingual learners felt like, I can just follow along. And they were hearing the instructions, right? They were getting that comprehensible input, right? They're hearing it, but they're actually seeing it, and they're visually seeing what they need to do. And so they were feeling successful. The other thing that I loved through modeling was anytime that I annotated any of the tasks on the board, and I was able to really think out loud and write down the notes and show students like what was going through my head. As a multilingual learner myself, I would make comparisons to things that were similar in Spanish, right? And look, this word is just like a word in Spanish. I would have many examples. And the one thing that I did that, I know not everybody feels comfortable with, I made mistakes on purpose, right? When I was reading and I would write my notes, I said, this is what I think it means. And it was awesome to have students raise their hands like, I don't think that's not what it means. Maybe Mr. Corrigan, right? Like, no, 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 no. But it made it engageable. And what I wanted the students to kind of see was it's okay to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. But what we do is we learn from those mistakes. And so the second example for cohesion of learning is we talk about GRR, right? The gradual release of responsibility, the way that we should gradually release responsibility from the teacher to the student, right? I think that in my own personal experience, I don't know what it was like for you, but when I think back of being in the classroom, the teacher did it and I did it. There wasn't much in between. And I went to school back in the day when it was just your desk, right, in rows. So there wasn't a lot of collaboration. So there wasn't a lot of we do, and there wasn't a lot of you guys do it together. And so we really emphasize on gradual release of responsibility and how we can slowly release that responsibility to multilingual learners and how we can help them collaborate and work together to gain access to that curriculum and that content that you're trying to deliver.
Yeah, I think when people talk about like how do we get students, multilingual learners to develop their language skills, like are they speaking together? Are they collaborating together? Because then you get reading, writing, speaking, and listening in all of that. And so I teach writing through and reading through collaboration. Students are reading the text together. They're talking about the text together. They have to produce a paragraph about the text together. So they're reading each other's writing. They're synthesizing it. They're writing it together. It's all interconnected. And so that's the cohesion part.
And just to touch a little bit more on that, I was always told, and I get to work with some great mentors. And I was always told it should be at least 50-50, right? They should hear from you 50% of the time, but they should get to collaborate and hear from each other 50%, the other 50% of the time. And it's amazing to walk around a room and get to hear the students talk to one another. And one of the things that we wrote in the book was translanguaging, right? Like that ability of being able to use all language, whatever it's, that way you can have your full capacity into the conversations. But so many times I heard students just, they start talking about it, because I was a history teacher, so their history in English, and then they'll go right to Spanish, right? Whatever part they needed to get a little bit more elaborate, but they couldn't do it in English, so they did it in Spanish, but it was academic. And it was really cool to just jump in and be able to understand that, they were engaging in the content and they were into it. And to be honest, one of the best things that I can ever remember is my students who took ownership of helping their peers, and they felt, number one, helpful. They felt like they did the right thing. But number two, what they didn't realize is if you have to reteach that content, right? You're learning that content and you're becoming an expert. You're getting that mastery in the content to be able to reteach it to your peers. And so it's just it's a lot of the little things that thinking back wasn't acceptable for me as a student. I always heard that you speak English in this room. You don't speak Spanish. It's English. You have to do it in English. And so there are lots of opportunities that now we just want to make sure that those experiences change for our multilingual learners.
So when you spoke about translanguaging, I think it really connects to all three: climate, challenge, and clarity. As students are translanguaging, you're creating a space, a climate for them to feel like they can engage, which means they can greater clarity of the content. And the content is the same because we're not challenging. We're giving them the same challenge. We're not saying, oh, no, you can't access this content. Oh, no, access this content with your multiple language that you need so that you can have greater clarity.
Right, 100%. And
It's
I think that's unfortunately missed in a lot of different places.
So LASSI's check.
So our last is checking into learning, and it's about the way that we assess our students. Informal and formal assessments, formative and summative assessments. Is this idea that we need to remove ourselves from the one-stop gap, the multiple choice test at the end of the unit. That is the only way that we do it, and then that is the grade that you get. If we want to be successful at assessing the learning of multilingual learners, we have to do it in different ways. We have to take the time to really talk to our multilingual learners and understand where they're at. And so for me, I love to do oral assessments, formative assessments, check-ins, because even though my student might not be able to write it or might not be able to put it into an essay, right? There were so many times where our students were able to tell me exactly what was going on. And so now I knew all I need to do is help and scaffold the writing part. It's not a content issue. The content's there. They understand it. They gained it. They have it. But because of where they are in their language skills, they can't produce an essay, right? And so it's not fair to say, you get a 0 or you get an F. You don't know the content, because that's simply not true. You know the content. And so the whole chapter focuses on different ways to assess multilingual learners, because it needs to be comprehensive for us to know where they're at. And so one of the best things, and I know I talked about exit slips, but just different ways in which you connect with students to assess where their learning journey is. Because in many schools still today, where I go places to places, we focus on a summative assessment. And oftentimes it's either an essay or a multiple choice test. And we know, I'll be honest, I'll speak for myself. Anytime I have any type of assessment that is a multiple choice or a true or false, the language gets in my way. Okay. And the moment that I read the question, I know an answer. And I tell you right now, 90% of the time I doubt myself. And I think that the question means something that it doesn't. And by the time it's all over, I put in the wrong answer. And then when I get it back, it's like, it's the first, I had it all along, right? And I know that in my own personal experiences, a lot of the questions, the way they were written, are not meant for multilingual learners, right? Because the way that we phrase things in Spanish are not the way we phrase things, in English. Same thing with Arabic or any other language. And so as a multilingual learner, you're struggling, right? You have that double challenge. You're trying to learn the language, you're always trying to learn the content. And so assessments were really, really hard. And I don't think uh, they painted a fair picture of where I was at. And so when we focus on it is, okay, how do we get away from that experience? And how do we ensure that each multilingual learner has an opportunity to demonstrate their content knowledge and demonstrate where they're at? And so it's an interesting point, because a lot of my conversations focus on, okay, when do we have the time to do that? Right. And so for me is, if we truly want to be intentional and we truly care about the learning of our students, these are all part of our planning, right? We put these checks into place before we even go over the content so that you have an opportunity. I remember in my classroom, I loved doing rotations or stations, right? And so one of my stations was simply put in place to check in and have a formative assessment, right? It was my opportunity to engage in a conversation with the students and know where they were at in their content. And so there's a lot of different ways, that we share it in the book. I know that we don't have enough time to go over all of those, but we need to do it. We need to make sure that we're setting different types of assessments for our multilingual learners.
Right. Well, that's why they can get the books. This is just a teaser, an introduction, so that they can purchase many copies so they can do book studies around it. So when you talked about assessments and checks, it's very aligned to our book, my book with Beth. And we talked about assessments can become reading and writing tests and not content-based tests. And that's when students who have the language, they're like, I don't understand this question. I don't even know how to answer this question. I know the content. I don't know how to answer, how to start it. And so you're talking about making assessments accessible through formative assessments. This has been a fantastic podcast, Dr. Oscar Corrigan. Let's do something called traffic light teaching. Let's wrap this up. What would you ask teachers to keep doing? Green light. Stop doing? Red light. And pause to consider yellow light.
All right. So green light, continue making an impact for students. Everything that you do makes an impact. I know that the work is hard, but it's meaningful. I know that building relationships with students is the key. So I hope that you continue to push yourself and continue to push your students to be successful learners, because I want you to remember that every single learner is a capable learner. And so we just have to give them that opportunity. I want you I want you to stop lowering the expectations of multilingual learners. I want you to stop, if you don't believe that they have valuable experiences and knowledge that they can contribute, I want you to stop that mindset. And what I want you to pause and ponder is, what can I do? What do I need to do? How can I make my teaching stronger? Because I know that every single educator cares about their students and you want to do the very best. So I think it's about pushing yourself to be better. And so I know that you and I share this belief. We can't get complacent. We have to continue to push ourselves. And each and every day, there are new teaching practices that are put into place that are better for students. And it is our job to learn those strategies so that we can improve the learning of our students in our schools.
Well, this book is the living embodiment of Dr. Maya Angelou's quote of, when we know better, we do better. And so thank you for the conversation, for this resource, so we can do just a little bit better with a few more practices. Dr. Oscar Corrigan, muchas gracias.
Gracias. Gracias por tenerme. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure spending some time with you. And I love everything that you're doing to push our educators to become better teachers of multilingual learners.
I'm blushing now. Thank you.